Hello there, it's Josh here from racingtoprofit.co.uk. It's Tuesday, the 20th of March, as I speak to you now. This time last week, I was having kittens. There was a knot in the stomach as I looked ahead to day one of the Cheltenham Festival 2018. Tips had been made, bets had been placed, and I'd be going out of my way to try the best I could to repeat last year's feats. I'm going to do a kind of day-by-day review video, and this is day one. I'll try and keep them as to the point and short as possible. Day one might be a bit longer because there's a few kind of overall things to kind of look at, kind of general points, I suppose. The aim is for this video to be useful. It's not just to kind of trot through and a look at kind of all the winners and let's pat ourselves on the back, although maybe there'll be a fair bit of that as I go through. But the point is for it to be useful, both in terms of reflection for myself on things that went well, on things that didn't, on the kind of profiles and ideas and pointers which stood out as the week went on that will be able to be applied to next year's festival. Yet again, the same sorts of horses with the same sorts of profiles, races run in a similar kind of way, helped point the way to overpriced horses and horses that ran well, and lists of horses on which to focus on. Yet again, I suppose the importance of a stats-based approach for me, anyway, came to the fore. I doff my cap to anyone who attacks the 10 handicaps and the other kind of 2 or 3 races I look at in the week without some sort of stats foundation. They really do deserve a lot of credit, those form experts that can open up a 20 runner plus festival handicap and just pluck out a couple of horses. I've always used my unique stats, both race trends and, as importantly, trainer, jockey, owner pointers, and kind of other micro angles that I researched myself to help point the way. So I'm going to kind of take us through that journey, I suppose, of the week. You get to see how my brain thought about things and how it's since thought about things that I can do better, etc. I will look at the results of each race. I'll point out the things that looked interesting to me. I have watched every race back from day one. I am recording this. I've got no notes in front of me. I'm recording it kind of off the top of my head. And maybe I'll pause as I go through just to try and think of relevant and useful things to say. So I would advise, well, I suppose, to be blunt, if you may want to improve your own betting or have an idea of how I think about things, or indeed note down any horses which caught my eye from the various races, then do by all means fetch a notepad, pause the video, get some notes, or get a piece of paper you can scribble on if you so wish, and make a cup of tea and or a cup of coffee, or pour yourself a glass of wine or whatever you fancy, and we'll crack on. And hopefully you find this interesting, and I'll try and make it entertaining, or as entertaining as you can with such a video. So day one arrived. Here we are. I should say what underpins the day. The many of you who joined for the week, thank you for doing so. With any luck, you all had a great time. None of you have requested a refund as yet, which is expected given how the week went, but you never quite know. What is in front of you here, this 25 pages of stats and pointers, and this is my foundation, my Cheltenham Bible, I suppose, which guided me throughout the whole week and that I would be lost without. What we have here are the kind of stats and trends and pointers against my unique profile. I use Horse Race Base for all of my stats research, and am forever indebted to the brilliant work that Chris does over on that superb website. You can see there in yellow the 10 handicaps that I focus on. These are the only races, well, these are the core focus that I tip in and focus on throughout the whole week. Quite deliberate. I'm not a big player in novice and graded races, by one particular race that I'll get onto in a moment. My drive and my passion in this game, and what kind of makes me bounce out of bed at 7 AM on a Monday morning, is trying to solve the puzzle And a festival handicap is the hardest jumps race, really, from a kind of puzzle solving perspective that I will come across all year. Hence why I kind of like focusing on them. I enjoy watching class, I enjoy watching graded races, but I don't much like getting involved in them from a betting perspective. It just doesn't tick my boxes, I suppose. It doesn't float my boat. And there are many finer judges of such races than I out there. So those are the 10 races. I also always look at a couple of bonus races, which include the National Hunt Chase, mainly effectively those over 3 miles or further, which I do like stamina tests in terms of races to look at. The National Hunt Chase was a bonus race this year. I missed out the RSA, depending on how many runners and kind of odds available. That sometimes can be a tipping race. It wasn't this year. And the Albert Bartlett Novices Hurdle, which I have I just have an odd record in of doing quite well. The stats seem to stand up quite well, and that may or may not have been the case in 2018. And that was it, really. Maybe I should expand to the Gold Cup. I enjoyed watching that. I didn't have any strong opinions on that this year. This year I had a kind of £10 anti-post bet on Mike By at 10 to 1. Sadly, he got outstayed and outbattled in the Gold Cup by a brilliant performance from Native River and as importantly, Dickie Johnson. So that's that. For each race, I went through my own stats, starting with 10 from 10. Trends and stats can be misused. They can be very misleading. Of great importance when you're looking at stats like this is the zero stats, or what these stats that come up against the positive stats, what the negative stats are, and whether or not those numbers and the sample compared to the actual number of runners that have happened or have run in the sample in a number of places, how significant that is and how much weight you put on that. Different people will use different things or put weight on different factors. And stats you can interpret stats. They do come from experience. Different people will put different emphasis on different pointers. I very much try and find a winning profile, as few stats as possible, 3 or 4 or 5 stats which I can use as a winning profile to point me and lead me the way. So that kind of is that, and they're all the different stats packs which all members had access to, and that's what I used as my core. I will stick through the bonus races so as not to reveal my 10 from 10 Albert Bartlett stats. The owners research, this was very useful this year. I looked at Gigginstown. You can pause that, note that down, do whatever you please with it. These pointers pointed to a hell of a lot of winners yet again in the handicap hurdles especially, and a couple of the non-handicap races as well. A few pointers there for JP McManus. He doesn't have a great record in as good as record in handicaps, although Le President has helped boost to those, and yet another one that won 9 to 1 or shorter. The money tends to be a big indication for whether a JP horse is going to run well at the festival. What else? Then there was 5 micro angles that I researched, all with the aim of pointing me towards a list of horses that I could use as starting points, not to back these horses blind and back the qualifiers blind. I'll go through, I haven't actually gone through the results of doing so as yet, but I doubt they were that successful. But without doubt, a few of the micros here in the qualifiers did help point me in the direction of 2 or 3 winners. So there's micro angles there, and the qualifiers for those were posted each day. They were saved within my horse race base account. The Irish Class Droppers is quite a good one. And then there were trainers of note for the handicap chases: David Pipe, Tony Martin, who didn't have any runners; handicap hurdles, Paul Nicholls, Nicky Henderson, Willie Mullins, Gordon Elliott, and some other notes and pointers there. And then the jockeys, the 3 jockeys which I always focus on, or have done the last couple of years: Davy Russell, Tom Scudamore, Paul Townend, again putting up qualifiers against these various pointers as the days went on. And again, especially for Russell and Townend, obviously those pointers did lead the way to a few nice winners, and I wish I'd have tipped a few more of them, but I will get onto that as we kind of ramble on through the week. So day 1 arrived. As you can see there, the big day is here. There is always clear staking advice. Very, very important when attacking the Cheltenham Festival. You have to have a pot of money that you are prepared to lose, because by only having that pot of money, in my view, you can actually enjoy the week and you can get to the Gold Cup, win, lose or draw, and actually enjoy watching the race, which is quite important, I think, if you're a National Hunt fan, and do just enjoy watching racing in general, whether or not you've backed anything or not. So I always use a 25-point bank spread across kind of 12, 13 races. Includes a bonus race at the end of Festival Week, the Midlands Grand National, which I have a decent record in and always like attacking. And I kind of use that and package that within kind of Festival Week success. So a 25-point bank as advised. I am a kind of win only punter on the whole, even at the festival, even in 20 runner plus handicaps. There are times where I deviate from that. In general, I don't like half a point each way. I would rather put 1 point win. I think yet again the results for the week kind of backed up that my staking advice and my own unique approach works for how I approach racing and betting, especially at this time of year. But of course, there's a note there. Staking is always entirely up to you. Many people do like betting each way and like to see a return more often, which is fair enough. But that's a very personal thing, and that's that. So yes, there was clear advice to put an amount next to the points you were willing to lose. If that was a five, if that was a tenner, then that should have been a bank of 250 quid that you were happy to lose. And I was quite clear that if you're going to follow a bet, if you're going to follow my tips, you follow them. You do not kind of pick or choose, in my view, because I could have got to the last race, the Grand Annual, and plonked out a 33-1 winner, having had an atrocious week, and suddenly the week is made. But again, that's a decision for people to take. So each day there was a tips summary where I would look at the races I've tipped in. I'd like to think I'm very fair with in terms of the odds that I ensure are available, and will declare to the lesser odds if needs be, the lower odds, making sure they are generally available. So yes, we had the 250, the 450 and the 530, as you can see there. There were the Microsystems angle qualifiers against each of those various different pointers that I put in that stats pack that I just discussed. Again, part of what I do is tipping, as is always the case, I suppose, but a bigger part is giving you and providing you with information and stats and, information and stats that you can use, and qualifiers and horses that you can use yourself in order to come to your own punting decision, because the best horse you can back is one that you've kind of picked yourself. I still believe that. Or indeed using information, from the likes of me and others, and deciding whether or not you want to have more on, or whether or not you want to kind of half stakes or whatever. I think that kind of element of independent thought is important, and I do think that is what keeps us all engaged in the racing game over a longer period of time. So yeah, there's jockey stats there. You can see Scudamore, Townsend, even, and then there were the tips, and then there were the write-ups. Write-ups are important because I will point to other horses that I think are dangers. I will try and give a commentary on the favourites and various other different things. Then you saw the stats profile, the horses that I used as starting points. You can see there, Kustar Savola did fit well against my general kind of race profile for that. Which is interesting enough. And National Hunt Chase, I go through blah. So that's that. So that's kind of the core of each day. Then there were some videos, some other musings, and etc. But the main part, I suppose, for judging the week were the tips in the summary. So that's that. Now I'm just going to kind of flick through the actual race cards and the results, and kind of chat about and talk about some things that looked most interesting to me from day one. And that kind of intro has been 13 minutes, but hopefully something of use there. In terms of you understanding my own approach and my philosophy, and how I come to the decisions I do, but that will become clearer as I skip through. I didn't have a tip in the Supreme Novices Hurdle, but I thought I would just touch on it because I've got a few views, I suppose. The cheer, the roar, the traditional Cheltenham Race 1, Day 1 roar was superb as always, and it really was exciting as the tapes went up. There is nothing quite like this week. And the race did not fail to deliver on the promise of the excitement to come. As some of you may be aware, I have a couple of shares in horses stable with Amy Murphy, so clearly I always like her runners to do well. Kalashnikov ran a superb race. He was just outclassed in the end, I think. He clearly does go well on heavy, on soft connections. Do think he'll be much better on a decent surface, and he is a chaser of the future. I think his season is done for now, and it'll be very interesting to see how well he can do in the years ahead. What else struck a chord here, I suppose? Mengli Khan running well, kind of at a big price, and an early indication that Gordon Elliott might well have a decent festival. Paloma Blue running well from a patient ride, staying on at the end. Maybe another early indication in day one that Davy Russell was riding this track at this meeting as well as ever. What else stood out? Well, the winner, Summerfield Boy, Tom George, and Connections clearly having a beast on their hands there, given the errors that he made that would knock out many a horse. To win as he did was really quite impressive, and touch wood, he stays sound because he could be some chaser of the future. And Tom George is a very, very good trainer of chasers, as we know. So he is clearly a horse to keep an eye out for, because that was quite some performance. So that's that. I'm not going to dwell on that race too much longer, but a few kind of early thoughts there, I suppose. That isn't the kind of race that I would look at for punting purposes too often, but clearly some of those horses are going to be stars of the future. Then we got on to the Ultimate Handicap Chase. A kind of unlucky, I suppose. Well, not unlucky. Shantou Flyer, I thought 20 to 1. I ditched my stats, I ditched my trends. I partly looked at it using them, but I partly looked at it using a kind of normal handicap chase analysis. This is just the kind of race 3 miles or further that I tip on in the free posts outside of festival week. And the important thing to say, it was heavy ground. I should have mentioned this earlier. For the first time in what, 29 years or so, the festival was starting on heavy ground. And for people like me who use stats and trends, that is very, very important, because all of the stats and trends that I've researched were based on festivals run on decent ground over the last kind of 10 years or so. Hardly any of them have been run officially on soft. And that was a very, very important point. So I was conscious going into this week that I maybe need to be more flexible, certainly to use my stats more as starting points, and certainly to put more effort into just looking at the race as a race and not just focusing with kind of in a blind focus, I suppose, on my stats shortlists, because there was a fear that the stats might not have been that good. These are based on races run at a different pace, on different ground, might be suitable to different horses, all sorts of different factors that clearly the ground can affect, and also pace and positioning in a race. So there was a chance also that the heavy ground may have, and I don't think this actually transpired, but starting out on the Tuesday, the ground may have actually thought or led to the thinking that we might need hardy battlers on side, that actually this may be a tougher festival week for horses that are unexposed and lightly raced, and we might actually want something that likes a fight and that is a bit more experienced and usually wins a festival race. As it transpired, I think in general, by the time we get to the end of the week, the same sort of horses with the same sort of profiles were winning and running well. And hopefully by the end of these videos, that profile will be clear and may help you have an even better festival than you may have done this year. So we got onto this race. Shantou Flyer ran a cracker. He keeps placing, bless him. We had Visor. The Visor came on this time. He raced prominently. I only wish that James Bowen, but this is said with hindsight, had absolutely launched him at the last couple of fences. If he had jumped the last 2 fences as well as the winner did, I'm pretty sure he might have won. Sitting on the fence. I think it'd have been even closer to his neck defeat. It may have been a photo. He may have been a half length up the other way, but he didn't, and that's because of a great ride from Lizzie Kelly, who put pressure on. She got her horse to the front at the right time. He jumped superbly. It was a superb ride. She had him handily. If the money is down, if you really want the horse to run well in the handicap chase, you should always be in the front third. You should always just be off the pace or getting an easy lead if you can. It was a wonderful ride from Lizzie. She put everything else on under pressure early on by kicking for home. And Shantou Flyer had to chase. I don't think Bowen saw a stride. He stuck with the horse the horse stuck with himself into the last couple of fences a bit. If he had jumped and got away from the last, certainly as well as the winner did, it would have been closer, but he didn't, and it is jumps racing. An early sign, an early indication that my trends should be treated at this stage as with caution. The 10-year record of French-bred horses in this race wasn't great. They'd yet to win in 10 years. It was a fairly small sample, 0 from 38 or so. 6 or so of them had placed, and the place stats were decent enough. 6-year-olds hadn't won this race. Again, that was from a small sample. From memory, 0 from 15, and 3 had placed. Actually, the place stats were decent for 6-year-olds. But it just shows you that not many took their chance in this race, and it would be tough and it would be hard going. I was happy to take him on, as I am any horse under 10 to 1. I generally want to look for something bigger in a festival handicap. But looking through this race, it generally was a race full of exposed sorts, or unexposed horses that might not be very good or had certainly more to prove than Kustar Savola. With Kustar Savola, we had an unexposed chaser coming here at the top of his game. He stayed 3 miles the last day. There were some pretty awful stats for horse that raced right-handed last time out before going into this race, which had some logical sense, but again, they were turned upside down and turned on their head. Again, at kind of boosting the theory that stats, and certainly big race stats and trends, should only ever be used as a guide. And he ran well. He dotted up the last day. He'd only gone up £7. He was progressive. He had superb Cheltenham form. It looked like he would enjoy this trip at this track, although it was an unknown. He did have to prove he would stay 25 furlongs in a decent run race around Cheltenham in heavy ground. And for all those reasons, I mistakenly thought, let's take him on. I didn't even have a saver. I didn't even throw a tenner at him at kind of 6 to 1. I bet all my own tips. I bet at £20 a point and have done for kind of the last year and a half. So that was him. Yeah, decent, progressive, good run, always in the right spot. Vintage Clouds, the Rogue. I believe one of the Dixon brothers, I forget which one it was, when they were doing Mark Your Card on RUK, said, prophetically, I suppose, I will back this horse when they put headgear on him. And he was proved to be correct again, I think. He does have a tendency to lose his place in the race before staying on. I thought Cook might be able to get out, get an easy lead, and actually stay there and gallop them. Well, he did get a lead to a point, but he did lose his place again before battling on again. Was a decent run, but some cheap pieces or a visor might see this horse transform. It might not, but he is interesting. Who else do I want to touch on? Again, it was an early indication. And this is a point about pace, and this is kind of why I suppose I said this first video might be long enough. And I might keep repeating some of these points as the week goes on. Ruby Walsh said something the day before, very interesting. It was very interesting when interviewed by Nick Luck. He said, in heavy ground, the jockeys are going to be conscious that this is going to be hard work, and they will not want to go too quickly on their mounts. And suddenly, the festival becomes a bit more about the jockey's brains, a bit more about tactics, a bit more about race positioning than it would usually be. Races run at a slower pace, and actually we would see that as the week went on. There were not many winners from memory, but I will kind of rejolt my memory as I go through the week, that came from really far back. Plenty of winners were always up in the van, either leading or in the front 4 or 5, in the right place to pounce. And Kustar Savola was one of those. Shantou Flower was one of those. Vintage Clouds was one of those. The horse I do want to focus on, I suppose the one eye catcher to a point, is Amon and Chinook, however you say that for David Pipe. Very inexperienced. Form in novice races. He raced keenly, track the leaders, as you can see there, led 15th, headed after 3 out, no extra between the last 2, excuse me. Given how keen he was, this was a very good run from a young, inexperienced chaser. He jumped very well, he travelled very well, and he is certainly one to watch. It'll be interesting to see if he might turn up in this race next year, or what happens with him, and whether he can progress past his current handicap mark. But he is likely raced for a chaser, and I thought that was a decent run. So I think that's all I want to say on that particular race. A few things of interest there. The stats profile did find the winner. It found the third. I was happy to take the Kustar Savola on at his price. I didn't think 6 to 1 was necessarily overly generous. Well done to anyone who, after Christmas time, or after his last win, or after one of his runs at Cheltenham, got on at 20 to 1, got on at 16 to 1. I believe there were quite a few people out there, so give yourselves a pat on the back if that was you. I suppose, what else should we say? This was another slight indication that Nick Williams, trainers whose horses were running well and trainers who were in form, their horses ran well also. So I think that's that. Then we got on to the National Hunt Chase. If I skip back, who did I tip? Miss Parfois and Duel at Dawn. Duel at Dawn was a bit of a throwaway, a bit of a poke, I suppose. He didn't do much. Miss Parfois ran a superb race, and it was agonising. Caught in the shadows of the post. Not too much to say here. Got a superb ride for me. Always in the right spot. Jumped well. You will see in the write-up, if I skip down, that I suppose of the rest, yeah, well, Mullins or Elliott could take this. I did mention, I probably should have put him in bold. Rathvinden is interesting, but it's Tenerife on the back, blah, 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 blah. I thought he looked interesting of the Irish ones. I'm not annoyed at not tipping him. They were similar prices, and I plumped for Miss Parfois in part because I thought, well, because of her course form, I knew she was a superb jumper. Rathvinden come here on the back of an unseat. She had more progress in it. She was a bit younger, and she got the £7 mare's allowance, which I thought might make all the difference in this race. Sadly, the winner received a superb ride from Patrick Mullins, full of confidence, and he battled on well and deserved his victory. Agonising for Anthony Honeybourne Connections. He stoked him, he kind of rode him quietly around the back. They didn't go much pace here, so having said what I just said in the last race, this was a race which was won by a horse that was very, very patiently ridden, that had a touch of class. This is something that will come up time and time again if I open up his profile. Start thinking about this type of profile. In particular, this horse, small fields, running well in graded races, in graded novice races, as some indication that they might run well in a festival handicap. The number of horses that win or place with that sort of profile, who are not too exposed in handicaps, yet have run well in graded races. And look at him, he had festival form as well, admittedly over hurdles, 5 lengths before Fulheen. He's clearly had some problems, but a touch of class, that's what we're looking for. And a touch of class is indicated by horses having form generally in small field novice races, graded races, mainly in Ireland, and or form at the festival or similar types of races to those at the festival, those kind of graded races. And of course, by running in those, yes, they have a touch of class, but also their handicap mark may be kept under wraps. Clever. So that's that. I think that's all I want to say on that one. Jewel of Jawn didn't really do much, didn't jump. Jury Duty is a bit moody. He doesn't like being in front too long, but anyway, I think he got outstayed there. And that's that. Sadly, we lost Moss back in that race and possibly one other. So that's that race. And then we moved on as I tick around the 27 minutes. I will keep this first video under half an hour best I can. We went to the Close Brothers Novice Handicap Chase, and by this point I'm thinking, oh no, it's going to be one of those weeks, isn't it? Shantou Flyer beaten by less than half a length at 20-1. Miss Parfois beaten in another ding-dong finish at kind of 7-8 to 1. Oh, it's going to be an awful week. In this race, I fancied Testify. Importantly, for this novice handicap chase, and this thinking, I'm pleased, which I changed slightly, came to the fore and helped me find the winner of the Martin Pipe, was that, you know, there's only £8 between bottom and top rated here. Suddenly, this isn't about handicap marks in terms of the horse in context of the other horse in the race, who's more well in, etc. Arguably, there's an argument to be made that it is actually more a case of who is the best horse. That necessarily wasn't on kind of what they've done to date. That transpired to be the case in the Martin Pipe. It didn't necessarily in this one, but the point here again, and a general point, these handicaps are getting more compressed, so certain stats and trends are less important, certainly those that are based on the overall rating and the weight carried, should definitely be treated with more caution. And more, I'm looking at more of the actual profile of the horse, the number of runs they've had, handicap runs, their graded novice form, whether or not they're arriving in form, and that's something else I'll touch on in a moment also. So Mr. Whitaker was tipped in this. I went under 10-1. I tipped an 8-1 shot. And why was I tipped into, or why did I tip myself into going for 8-1? Normally in a race like this, I would kind of be looking at 10-1. Can I make a case for anything? 10-1, 12-1, or bigger? But what tipped me over the edge of this was the fact that he arrived here on the back of the win, and that win was at the track over a bit further. And that kind of made me think 8-1 was decent. Proven kind of in conditions and progressive. He also ticked some of my stats, I think, but in any case, I thought he looked interesting, possibly had a fair bit in hand, and I liked the fact in a kind of novice handicap with inexperienced chasers that he arrived in form, in winning form, that he arrived with course form, and he had the Brian Hughes book, which was a positive because I think he's a wonderful jockey, and he rode in the end a good race. He got stuck in a bit of traffic, but he just got up, swings and roundabouts, how the day can change. He gets up, by a kind of head or whatever it was, short head, and backers of Rather Be would have been in kind of agony. And how I felt on 2 earlier races in the day. That is a superb run from Rather Be. I tipped him in last year's Martin Pipe, was it? And I went big and tipped him big on the blog when he ran on Aintree, at Aintree, thinking and hoping that he might do that. As an aside, I do not know what connections have planned with Burbank. Search him, find him, but I'm hoping that they may indeed be lining him up for a tip at this race, for tilting him at this race at Rather Be one, but I could be completely off the mark there. But Burbank, I'm sure, has a decent ground handicap graded hurdle in him. Anyway, that's an aside. That's kind of how this video is going to be. Rather Be one rail, proving that Nicky Henderson was in form. Horse is running well. To do that on that ground, when, yes, he won Smallfield Novices, but he outclassed horses on tougher ground. I really did think he needed better ground, and to run as well as he did was superb. Was a superb effort. Jeremiah Graft again always had him in a handy spot just behind the leaders. Again, chasers that raced prominently, arriving on the back of the win, arriving in form, generally ran well and did not let backers down. So he's one to watch. Clearly, he's not going to go under the radar because he was second in a kind of Cheltenham handicap, obviously. Gold Present won and ran as well in last year's race, and Gold Present has clearly done quite well this season. Whether or not Rather Be gets 3 miles in time, we shall see. But you know, there's going to be more progress in him, no doubt. And maybe they'll plot a different path, a similar path to what they have done with Gold Present, who ran well in this race for Henderson last year. What else do I want to say? Testify, I'm going to keep on side and keep an eye on. He didn't have big field form. He ran fairly well, but then he made an absolute howler. I think it was 4 or 5 out, and it looks like how he ran that completely knocked his confidence. He totally went after that, made quite a bad error. I think his confidence went. He was then surrounded by horses. I don't think he necessarily liked the hustle and bustle. Maybe he didn't like the track. Maybe he's just a small field horse. Maybe he's just immature of mind. Hopefully, Trevor Hemmings has a nice horse for the future there, and I will be keeping faith with him. I will be noting and tracking every horse I tipped, because generally they're of the unexposed end, and there should be more to come from them one day in handicaps. And those that didn't win, hopefully I'll get my money back at some point. I don't think necessarily there are any other horse I want to mention in this race. Well, 2 actually, having said that. And again, I say I'm going from memory, so you have to bear with me in these thought processes. Rocklander, again, he set a steady pace, led, got his own way up front, and another prominent racer who didn't finish that far behind. That was a decent run. Tom George hasn't been in the best of form, but they started to run better this week. It'll be interesting to see what they do with him, whether or not he turns up at Aintree. He's always one that's, he has handled deep ground, but he's also run well on a decent surface, and he's inexperienced as a chaser. That was a decent run for your kind of 4th run in the chase, first in a really big field. He did get his own way up front, but he generally jumped well, and without doubt, Rocklander has decent handicap chases in him, no doubt. Ibis de Roer was interesting. I kind of want to have a look at him, and I'm doing this live because I haven't as yet. I've kind of got a thinking in my head that he's better on decent ground. Maybe that Cheltenham win might be evidence to that, but in any case, obviously he had a bit of a break as well. I assume he probably had an injury when last seen here at Cheltenham. Newbury came back and didn't do much. He ran pretty well for a long way here. Every chance 3 out before fading. That might have been fitness still. That might have been ground. Maybe Nichols has got an eye on him for something at Aintree, or maybe air. But he did run here. He jumped and travelled well, like a horse that's getting the hang of chases. His handicap mark is coming, well, will come down again. You would like to think on a decent ground chase, given his prominent running style, he's got a touch of class. He is a former festival winner, that he will take advantage of his handicap chase mark at some point. So that was day 1 done and dusted. I forget how much profit we took into day 2. It was +3 if you got kind of 9 to 1, which was available with 3 or 4 bookmakers when I posted the evening before, and then again widely available in the morning, or 8 to 1, which was always generally available. +3 points or +2 points on the day. I'd have taken that It could have been much better. It could have been much worse. I don't think any of these system bets necessarily did too much. Nope. I'm just looking down any of the notes. Boo Dare, that it was short. No comment, ran okay to a point in that particular race. The odds are very much a guide for some of these owners, especially JP. Trainers, Pipes didn't go too well. I touched on Amon and he ran fairly well. Russell, Paloma Blue ran fairly well. A lot of these didn't qualify. Melon for Townend even ran well for a decent second place. So there were some hints there at day one. And I'll go on to as I go on to day two, but the same kind of things keep cropping up in terms of unexposed horses, form in novice and graded races, prominent racers, and the same kind of characters and feel of horses running well for Elliott, for Townend, for Russell. Obviously, the Irish had started to do quite well. Henderson's had been running okay. And the stats and my own pointers and my own form, I felt okay. I felt in decent enough form going into day two. But my week is always made by backing 2 or 3 winners in the races I target, and it's certainly made if one of those winners is 20 to 5 to 1 or bigger. As I march through day two, we will see if I could find myself any such winners and if we could have any big prices to cheer. I left day one feeling content. I didn't think like I'd made any mistakes, really. I didn't think like I'd missed any winners. Maybe I could have had a save on Kustar Savola for my own personal punting. Maybe I could have mentioned him a bit more strongly in the write-up. I don't think I'd have ever tipped him at that price, so I can live with that. But the others had run well. Rathfinden, bit annoying. I did have a saver on personally. I could have been a bit stronger with my write-up and how I mentioned him, probably put him in bold. I did think he was fairly interesting. But happy enough with how the day went, and thank the Lord Mr. Whitaker got up at the end, because I would have gone into day two in a horrible mood that would have affected how I looked at races, and it would have affected me for the rest of the week probably in some form, because I'd have been a miserable sod having given away 7 points or whatever it was on day one. So thank the Lord for Brian Hughes getting out of his pocket just in time and giving him one hell of a drive. So yes, that's 36 minutes, but hopefully you've picked up something there, a few horses to track, a few ideas to apply to racing in general, to big races in general, and especially this festival. And as I go through the other 3 days, the same kind of themes, the same kind of horses keep reappearing. By the end of this video tour, all of us will be left in no doubt of how we can have successful festivals in handicaps in the big field races. So that's that. Let's move on. Thanks for watching this one. I know it's 37 minutes. I hope that has gone fairly quickly for you and you found it useful. But by all means, post a comment if you have. Post a comment if you found it awful. As long as you're polite, I don't really mind. So this is Josh. Until the next time, saying thanks for watching. Until day two's review and on, which will be a bit quicker because there's only 2 races I looked at. Yeah, until then, this is Josh saying bye for now and thanks for watching and see you soon.